I'd like to say hello to Tina Sloan, who works here with the charity The Food Chain, and I'll let Tina explain all about it.
Lovely. The Food Chain, for those of you who don't know, provide nutritional support for people with HIV. So when we very first started, that was a group of friends delivering a meal to some of their friends on Christmas Day who were dying of AIDS. And the next week they realised actually their friends still couldn't get out and shop and cook, so they delivered another Sunday meal. And we haven't missed a Sunday since that Christmas Day in 1988. The face of HIV has changed an extreme amount obviously in that time, and thankfully people are living longer and healthier lives, and our services have changed to reflect that. So we're often providing grocery boxes for people who perhaps can't afford to access the food they need to stay well. And we're also giving people the cookery and nutrition advice and classes here in our new kitchen to make sure that they know how to cook and what they need to cook to stay well for longer. We only recently moved into this space, and Sarah Jane Evans, who some of you might know, is actually a patron of the Food Chain and has been for many years. And she came to do an event here, and she said, actually, do you know what, you should get the Guild to come along and hold one of their meetings here. And it's lovely to have you all, and we are using the space to generate income when we can. So it is available for hire. If you've got cookery classes or tastings or anything else, then do drop me a line. But I hope you have a fantastic evening, and if you've got any questions about the charity afterwards, then come and talk to me.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Most of you, I'm sure, know Sue very well. I've met everyone by now, haven't you, Sue?
Yeah.
A great expert on Switzerland, Alsace, which is her home, has been for 20 years now.
Yeah.
Is that right? And very highly regarded expert in Swiss cheese in particular. You probably don't need me to say that, but obviously I have to do my 2 lines of introduction. You're probably less familiar. Well, I don't know. Some of you must know Rachael. If you bought cheeses from KäseSwiss. Yes, I thought so. Rachael, who used to work at Neal's yard. And how long is it now since you set up KäseSwiss?
Since 2005.
2005, so about 7 years now you've been working with Swiss cheese and importing cheeses that nobody else has. And there are interesting new movements afoot in the cheese world in Switzerland, and indeed in the wine world, but both Sue and Rachael will tell you about those. And Joël from Dobson Wines very recently took over Dobson Wines, who are one of a very rare breed of Swiss wine importers, and probably you are the biggest, in micro terms, importers of Swiss wine into the UK. And these are, boutique wines is probably a kind of shishi word to use, but they're small wineries.
Yes,
basically.
they're artisan wines.
They're artisan wines, they're small wineries, and you only import wines of excellence. Here their role, and Joel's very keen to say that the role of the wines tonight is to support the cheese, not to shine as the sort of bright firmament of Swiss wines, but I'm sure we will love them anyhow. And we're really delighted to have 3 experts in their field. It's absolutely wonderful. So without further ado, you've decided which way you're going to do this, aren't you?
Yes.
I shall hand out and do whatever's, just start and tell me what to do.
Very good. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and lovely to see old friends, and hopefully look forward to making new ones. And thank you, Sylvia, for all your organisation. I think it was a slightly hairy business getting this thing together, because you have one of the hiccups.
We had a few hiccups and changes of venue, but I think we found the perfect formula in the end. So all good things worth waiting for. So here we go.
Perfect. Well, I, as some of you may know, and as Sylvia has already mentioned, I have written a number of books. I've written 9 books. I've written quite extensively on Alsace, where I live and have lived for the last 20 years. I've written quite a bit about Switzerland as well. But actually this is the first whole book I've written on cheese. Why cheese? Well, because I find cheese, and I think some of you are in the same boat, endlessly fascinating as a subject. I think it's a kind of magic product. Somebody wrote a wonderful phrase, Clifton Fadiman, described cheese, many of you will have heard this, lovely thing, I wish I'd written it myself, that cheese is milk's great leap towards immortality. And put at its simplest, that is what cheese is. I mean, it's just a simple way, not so simple way, of prolonging the life of a very perishable product. But what a way, and what an amazing variety of cheeses you can end up with. I mean, you start out with milk, cow's milk, sheep's milk, goat's milk, and you can end up with anything from the sprints that we're going to have today, which is an extra hard grana type cheese, to a tiny little cushion of soft, fresh goat's cheese that's had probably 4 days, 5 days of ripening. So you've got this incredible range, starting out with this single product of milk. So I find it endlessly fascinating, and the more I delve into it, the more interesting I find it. And writing this book was a wonderful project. Apart from anything else, it gave me an opportunity to rediscover Switzerland. Since we moved to Alsace, I did live in Switzerland for about 10 years, but then we moved across the border, and Switzerland had got sort of a bit left behind. So it was a wonderful opportunity to rediscover Switzerland. And why Swiss cheese? Well, proximity was one reason, and the fact that I know the country quite well. But the other more important reason, in a way, is that if you've been in touch with the world of Swiss cheese at all, you'll know that in the last kind of 15 years, there have been some really enormous changes in the little world of Swiss cheese making. And it is a little world, because it's a small country, and all the cheese making is on a very small scale. And the reason for these huge changes mainly are down to the fact that up until the mid-90s, all Swiss cheese making was centrally regulated by an organisation called the Schweizerische Käseunion, the Union des Fromages Suisses. And it was absolutely every detail was regulated. What you could make, where you could make it, how much you could make, how many tons of Gruyere you could make in a year, and so on. And the price was guaranteed, which was kind of comfortable for the cheesemakers, not necessarily good for quality, because, you know, if you can always make, if your product will sell anyway and someone's going to take it off you, you don't necessarily focus on quality. So in the mid-90s, this august body, which had been in existence since, it was either just before or just after the First World War, it outlived its usefulness. It actually went bust. And then there was a complete change in the whole sort of world of Swiss cheese making. And the guy who made, Michel Beroux, who made these little cheeses, which we're going to taste first, he describes the period afterwards as après la libération, after the liberation. It's a sort of Swiss cheese re-day. And it really did change things for the cheesemakers, because the first thing I think that happened was that there were a lot of innovations. There have been some amazing new cheeses coming onto the market, and those were not, they just couldn't happen before, because if you wanted to make something new and you lived in an area which was an area where Spritz was made or where Gruyere was made, you actually were not allowed to. One of the guys I spoke to said that, oh, I would have loved to have made X, Y, and Z, but I wasn't allowed to. So there was a whole generation of cheesemakers, very talented, skilled cheesemakers, who wanted to do new stuff, but had not until they'd been able to. And the best example, I mean, he's not typical because he's a bit of a one-off, but there's a wonderful guy called Willy Schmidt, who's a bit of a hero of mine, as Rachel knows, who is in a little town called Liechtenstein in the eastern part of Switzerland, kind of over there, top right-hand corner of Switzerland, near to the Austrian and the German borders. And he had always made cheese all his life, on other people's account. And then when all this happened, when all these changes came, he set up his own thing. And when I went to see him for the book, he'd been in business on his own for probably 2 years. And at that time, he already had about 25 different cheeses. And I'm not talking, you know, one of them which had a little bit of apricots in it and another one which had a bit of paprika. He doesn't do those sorts of cheeses. They really were seriously different. From goat's milk, cow's milk, sheep's milk, from extra hard down to little gloomy rinded ones. So a real range of great cheeses. And so I said to him, you know, surely you can't have created all these cheeses in 2 years. And he said, he gave this wonderful sort of sideways grin. And there's some fun pictures of him in the book. And he said, actually, I created them in a month. So I kind of did a double take. And he said, I had all these ideas for cheese running around inside my head, which I had been dying to make all my life, really. But I was forced to make other things. So he said to himself, I will make, you know, these cheeses, and I'll see how they go. And the ones that work, I will continue to sell, and the other ones I'll forget about. Well, in the event, they've all sold, and he's continuing to make them, and I can't remember how many he makes now, but probably between 25 and 30. So he's not, let's say, he's not typical of this movement, because he is, as I say, a bit of a one-off. But he does, it is an example of how things are changing, and what fun some people are having, and the new stuff that's coming onto the market. So lots of innovations, lots of renovations as well, because I'm sure all of you are mainly familiar with the Gruyères, the large, hard mountain cheeses, right, when you think of Switzerland. Gruyère, Emmentaler, Appenzeller, perhaps to a lesser extent. We've got a bit of competition. And those cheeses also, when this deregulation happened, they also, I think, took a real kind of spring forward. They've got a sort of new spring in their step. There's a lot of increased self-belief. And I think a good demonstration of that, a good explanation, is that many of them have applied for and received 10, I think, Swiss cheeses in the last 12 or so years have applied for and received Appellation Contrôlée status, AOC. And they're proud of that, and they're glad about that. Apart from anything else, it means that their names can finally be protected, because the Swiss, as you know, did not protect the name Gruyère or the name Emmental, so you make those cheeses all over the world, but they've got around that. So there's, you know, there's a good, a real sense amongst those golden oldies, if you like, that yeah, we've got something terrific here. We want to really make it better and work on that. So innovations and renovations, and there's also a really nice, which I work on very much, a revival of Alpine cheeses, the Alpage cheeses. These are the ones that are made between roughly middle of June and middle of September, with from the milk of the cows that go up to the high pastures for the summer, the transhumans. And they've always existed. In fact, they are the backbone of Swiss cheese making. All Swiss cheese started out like that. There wasn't any cheese making in the valleys until about the 19th century. Originally, they were all made in the Alps. And but these Alpine cheeses, I think, have got also a new impetus and a good push. They're well supported, they're well subsidised, I can tell you. They couldn't do it otherwise. If you think the EU does good subsidies, talk to a Swiss farmer, especially a mountain farmer. But you know, without that, they actually couldn't exist. And apart from the fact that I think people are really appreciating and valuing this particular kind of cheese, those farmers are doing a wonderful job of keeping the Alps looking wonderful. I mean, I don't know whether any of you guys go to Switzerland in the summer, but you know, without alpine farming, those beautiful manicured hillsides, they would not look the same. They would all be full of thistles. So it's a rather, I think, absolutely admirable form of extensive agriculture, highly subsidised, sure, but it wouldn't exist otherwise. And they do a good job, you know, looking after the Alps. So I'm all for that. And they make a wonderful product too. The other thing that has come in new is that there are a few goat's milk and sheep's milk cheeses, which is quite new for Switzerland. Funnily enough, goats and sheep predate cows in the Alps by miles. They were the original livestock up there. But Switzerland never really developed a tradition of goat's milk and sheep's milk cheeses like, say, France or Italy or even Spain. So this is quite new. And then there are also a few blue cheeses, which I'm very happy about. I love blue cheese. Did you hear the food programme a couple of weeks ago? Sheila Dillon did one on British blue cheeses. And I pricked up my ears because a lot of what she said about the British attitude to blue cheese is very much like the Swiss attitude. They're a little bit cautious about blue cheese. They're not crazy about them, but they're slowly coming in. So all of those new and fun things coming in. And two other things I think just to keep in mind too, which are really important to know about Swiss cheese. The first is that they really are small scale, all of them. I mean, they really aren't any industrial cheeses. I mean, even Emmy's not that big, is it?
No.
So they really do merit the label of that much overused term, artisan or artisanal. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that a huge number of them, and this will interest those of you who are interested in raw milk cheeses, about 80% of cheese in Switzerland is made from raw milk. Would anyone like to hazard a guess of what percentage of cheeses are made from raw milk in France, say? I was terribly shocked when I first heard this, because I kind of imagined that there were lots and lots and lots.
20?
It's close to 20, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Switzerland mainly makes, even now with all these changes, makes hard cheeses, and there's no reason not to use raw milk for a hard cheese. But it is quite significant that there are huge numbers. So it's a wonderful world, which I've got delving into, and which Rachel will tell us a bit more about and introduce us to. What we thought we'd do next is we're going to have the first cheese, which is a soft, gloomy rind cow's milk cheese from raw milk, made by Michel Berou, the one who described the post-deregulation thing as après la libération. And what I'll do while we're serving that, I'm going to just read to you a little bit from my book. Fleurette, and the sort of subtitle is Tome de vache au lait cru. It's a tome. It's quite unlike a French tome. If you think of Tome de Savoie, you know that's a semi-hard cheese, quite deep with a rind. This is quite different. This is a bloomy rind cheese, Camembert family, if you like. And it's one of the few in Switzerland that's made from raw milk. So I'll tell you a bit about that, and in a minute you can have a little taste while I'm gossiping about that.
So good evening. The first wine is going to be a light white. It's the absolute typical, everyday Swiss white wine. It's a Chasselas, which is a grape that pretty much is grown the world over as a table grape or as a marker grape to find out when the grapes are ready to harvest. But only the Swiss make wine out of it to that extent, as a main wine, as a single variety wine. It's probably the two biggest characteristics. It's a fairly low acidity wine, so it's quite light and pleasant and easy to handle. It's perhaps, the Swiss drink it with everything. They drink it with really strong cheeses, with fish, with meat, drink it on its own. But on average, it's best suited to lighter cheeses, fresh cheeses, goat's cheeses, than the really strong cheeses. It doesn't stop the Swiss, but that's just us. It is also this particular one is a Désalé, which is the top location for the Chasselas in Switzerland, or one of the top locations in the canton of Vaud on Lake Geneva. If you've ever seen pictures, it's these really, I don't know, these incredible landscapes, these steep vineyards that cascade down in terraces all the way down into Lake Geneva. If you've ever been to Château de Chillon, which a lot of people who visit Switzerland go, you go through that and you just have these incredible landscapes with the map out in the background. I say it's about the cheese, so I'm not going to talk about the wine too much.
So I'll tell you a little bit about the cheese while you're having a little nibble at it. It's this Tome de vache au lait cru. Tome in Switzerland are small, soft, bloomy rind cheeses. You have to think Camembert, it's that family. Made generally of cow's milk, sometimes goat's milk, and occasionally a combination of the two. They've been made in the French-speaking regions since at least the 19th century, often on a domestic scale, and designed to be eaten when just a few days old. Sometimes they were the soft siblings of bigger, harder cheeses, with which they shared the dairy, made from small quantities of milk left over after the big cheese had had its turn. Nowadays, most Swiss Tome are made from pasteurized milk. They have a thickish, downy rind, soapy texture, absolutely no flavour. There is one that stands out from the crowd, Michel Berou's Fleurette, subtitled Tome de vache au lait cru. So you can tell from the name it's made from milk. the dairy in Rougemont, Canton-Vaud. Does anybody know Rougemont? Do you know where I am? This is in the Pays d'Or, beautiful, near Gstaad, wonderful summer and winter. So his dairy is in Rougemont, and they were producing it on a small scale before this guy arrived on the scene, but he took the whole thing into quite another gear, and he's making 20-fold quantity from when he took over. And the breakthrough came when the famous chef, Freddy Girardet, who had a chalet in nearby Schönried, discovered the cheese and rather took Michel Leroux under his wing. And Michel says it was a stroke of luck having him as a customer. He was very critical, but he was very fair. And he helped me a lot, and he actually sent some back at the beginning and said, "You can do better than this." So he claims that was a really big help. And then in March 2000, a state-of-the-art fromagerie was built at the entrance to the village, just opposite. There's the most beautiful 16th century chateau and a lovely old Romanesque church. The new dairy building is designed to meet the latest EU specifications. It's owned by a cooperative of dairy farmers, and that's often the model. The farmers own the dairy, the actual cheese-making dairy, and they hire somebody to make cheese for them. And Michel is their tenant. All the animals are pastured in summer and fed on hay in the winter, and no silage, of course, is allowed in the feed, because those of you who are into cheese-making a bit will know that silage taints the milk, and it actually makes the cheese-making process extremely difficult. He contracts to buy the farmer's milk, for which he pays above the market rate, and they deliver once a day in the morning, combining the chilled evening milk with the morning milk. I can still remember when they used to pull in the churns on sledges on freezing cold winter mornings, he smiles. I mean, they're tiny little dairies, these places, and many villages will have their little dairy still. They are diminishing in number because they're consolidating, but they do still exist. And then the cheese making begins. The starter bacteria, which is a batch of whey reserved from yesterday's cheese making, is first added. Then the milk is heated to barely lukewarm, and the rennet is stirred in. Once the milk has set, it looks like a great big vat of yogurt. Have you seen cheese making, any of you guys? Yeah.
Is it vegetarian rennet, or what they use?
No, it's not. It's from calves. Yeah. Once the milk has set, the curds are broken up into large walnut-sized globs. It's a completely different process from the hard cheese making. And it's pumped from the vat into small cylindrical perforated molds and left to drain. How long will they drain, I ask? Oh, responds Buru with a smile. We're working with raw milk here. C'est pas moi qui décide. I'm not the one who decides. It's the milk. He touches briefly on the various factors that can affect the cheese-making process and influence the speed at which things progress, ranging from the temperature both outside and inside the dairy, the cow's rations, in other words, whether they're eating grass and it's summer or whether they're hay cheeses, and where they are in their lactation cycle. So all of these things influence this little thing, and he's got to control that through the year and try and make and does succeed in making a fine product. Once the cheeses are formed, the perforated cylinders are lifted off to reveal little white discs of infant cheese. These are laid out on wire racks, sprinkled with salt. That's the first time the salt comes in. Some of you may, if you're not into cheese making, you might think perhaps the salt goes into the milk when you're doing that, but actually the salt always comes after and plays a very important role. So the salt is sprinkled onto the outside of them, and then they're transferred to a cool, damp cellar. Within a few days, a downy duvet of white mold starts to form on the surface. La croûte commence à fleurir. The crust is beginning to bloom, which is lovely expression. Is how he describes it. After between 6 and 10 days ripening, because this one is quite a short ripened one, and it's got a 3-week life, if you like. The cheeses are ready to roll. Michel invites us down to the cellar to inspect the finished fleurette. Amongst the serried ranks of bloomy white cheeses, we can't help noticing, to our consternation, that a whole batch seemed to be covered in little black specks. With a perfectly straight face, Michel explains that those are the ones that fell on the floor, hastening to assure us they'll be fine once we've dusted them off a bit. And then we notice his bushy moustache beginning to twitch imperceptibly, and he burst into helpless chuckles, delighted at his joke. And then he explains, actually, wiping his eyes, it's a small batch that's rolled in chopped truffles. I made them especially for a hotel in Gstaad for Christmas. In the final step, the fleurette, with or without truffles, are hand wrapped in those in that lovely little white package with the blue writing, in the distinctive white and blue wax paper. And then there's a brief 3-week window in which to enjoy this wonderful cheese at its most fragrant. It's matured just long enough to develop a mind of its own, and it runs about in a deliciously undisciplined sort of way, very unswiss. It tastes, I think, wonderful. Layers of flavour, I don't know what the time to do it, kind of let it melt on your tongue. And you know, in my mind, I'm always comparing this with these rather dreary pasteurised milk ones, which actually taste of soap and are really dull. So it's a great cheese. And there's a wonderful French food writer, a broadcaster called Jean-Pierre Coff, who some of you will know of. And he apparently said about this, c'est bon ça, putain que c'est bon. Ça sent, what do you say, ça sent, yeah, c'est un vrai fromage qui sent la ferme. Cheese, that's good, a real cheese that tastes and smells of the farm. So that's fleurette, and it's one of my favourite.
I have to own up to something.
Yes.
we get these cheeses in about every 3 weeks, because that's when I bring a delivery over. And what we tend to do is try and sell out in the first 3 days of when it comes in, because when they first come in, they are probably 20 days old. The rind is very thin and slightly powdery, I suppose, delicate. And the interior of the cheese is a bit like eating alpine cream. It's not such a cultured flavour, quite light and very floral. These ones that you had tonight are from the last batch, so they are probably 3 to 4 weeks old. So what you're tasting is the development of flavour. They become slightly bit more farmy, maybe agricultural. Still has that very delicate rind, which is very unusual and quite difficult to get. And the rind,
to achieve?
Yeah, difficult to achieve. And the rind doesn't have any bitterness or overpowering flavour, which is again why it's very good. But if you come to our warehouse on Saturday morning, the cheeses are at Dover as we speak, and they'll be 20 days old, and it'll be quite different experience. So
I thought that was amazing. I couldn't believe that was so young. And I'm glad you picked up on the layer, because you kind of thought, well, I've had cheese like this before, but then there was something terrific that came afterwards.
I think there are wonderful layers of flavour that if you give yourself time to taste.
Yeah, fantastic.
He's doing a good job. He's a lovely guy. He makes, you've got other cheeses of his too, haven't you?
yes,
The hard and the semi-hard.
Korea style and
Yeah.
I should ask that terrible question, like, how much would it cost if I came in to buy it? What's the sort of
I think they're $5.25 for a cheese. They actually, they were $4.95.
That's the trouble with the Swiss franc.
I was just saying to Joelle, and I thought it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
Totally, just you get this wonderful caramel note as well, and then you have more layers and things with the children together. So now we have to ask that terrible question: what's it going to cost?
Well, that's a challenge with that one, because I can't sell it at the moment, because it is a 7 deciliter bottle, which is why I brought it. I'm getting a new batch, so I don't know. But this is
it's legal in Europe?
no,
It's not legal here.
No, it's not legal in
Outside of Switzerland. They were all 70 litres in the
I mean, this was,
70 litres.
when it was imported, this is a fairly, for Chassa, this is 2008.
Yeah.
So at the time it was perfectly okay to bring in. But I can't bring new ones in. But they're making
Gone up
it,
to 750.
not all of them. So in Switzerland, I would say
Switzerland is rather a special world of its own.
70% of wine is still in 7 deciliters. I keep finding wine that I'd like to import and I can't. Until they bottle it differently for me. But this was actually, at the time, it's
but it's just covered in hay flowers. When the cheese is about 3 weeks old,
Oh, wow.
they literally get dried hay flowers in a big bucket and put the cheese in, press it on, and then mature it. And that piece is about 10 months old.
What's it called?
Hooiblumen case.
Which means hay flower cheese.
I suppose the closest we've got to that is probably Herefordshire hop.
Yeah.
Which
Oh, is it?
kind
Yes,
of just
yes.
misses it by about 10 million miles.
You say it was me.
And Rachel, this is a semi-hard or getting towards hard? Yeah. Well, especially after 10, did you say 10 months?
10 months, yeah.
And it comes from
The east.
Toggenburg. Is it Unterwasser?
It's organic milk actually, this as well. And it's mountain milk, so it's, I think the milk they get is from above like 700 metres.
I don't know whether any of you know or understand, and if you do I should be very impressed, because not many people in Switzerland know and understand the difference between an Alpkäse and a Bergkäse. An Alpkäse is an Alp cheese and a Bergkäse is simply a mountain cheese, but the whole difference is that the Alpkäse is made up on the Alp in a tiny dairy, probably in someone's chalet. And chalet is a bit of a grand word because you think of some beautiful wooden thing that people go skiing in, but they're actually very simple. And I'll read to you in a minute about the Gruyere. So the Alp cheese has to be made on the Alp from the milk of cows that are grazed on the Alp. The Bergkäse is made from milk that came from cows that are up there, but the milk is then taken down into the valley and made into cheese like this one. This is actually a Bergkäse. It's a bit of a small difference, but
Are there many cheeses still made up in the Alps?
quite a few. Apparently, they did a sort of census recently, and the girl at the Switzerland Cheese Marketing, who sponsored my book, said that they reckon there are about 1,200 Alp cheeses. But I mean, every Alp has its cheese, and it's tiny, an Alp's field up the mountain. But
Cows still
they
go
are.
up the Alp, all of them, so it's a lot of cows.
It's a wonderful thing. I'm going to read to you about the Alp cheese from Gruyere because to me it's just such a wonderful. Has anyone seen? Yeah, we saw it together, didn't we? Didn't we see them making? Yes. Some. I'll read to you just about Gruyere d'Alpage, the Alp Gruyere, because then you get a bit of. I want to take you with me up to one of these little chalets, just so that you can visualize and feel what it's like. It's to me it's completely unique that this actually still exists. That they take the cows up, often on foot, in the middle of June. That will depend on the snows that winter and on the state of the grass, and there they will stay in pretty simple conditions. We stayed up, and there's one of them does a B&B in the Berner Oberland, and we stayed a couple of nights with them, with one of the people that I wrote about. And there's no hot water, there's no running water. The loo is a latrine which is out beyond the stable, and you don't have a shower basically. We only stayed 2 nights. But it was just so great, and we really saw, how they do this actually from when they get up in the morning to when they go to bed at night. Yes, they live there. This particular family live up there. So does the Gruyere guy from June until September. I mean, they go down also. So early one summer's morning, I set off in search of some Gruyere d'Alpage. Somewhere between Bulle and Châteaudet, we took a right turn up a dizzyingly steep single-track road with passing places. Framing the beautiful broad sunlit pre-alpine valley was a range of jagged peaks. Below their creased and crinkled summits, still streaked with traces of snow, even in July, swathes of deep green spruces gave way in turn to subalpine pastures, intensely green now after the snow melt, and gaily splashed with dandelions, marguerites, and pink and white clovers. The flora in these alpine pastures is absolutely incredible. And they've done serious studies which demonstrate the direct effect of the flora on the cheese in terms of flavour, obviously, but also actually in terms of chemical composition. We slid to a halt below the tree line in front of a simple concrete and wood chalet. They are on the whole pretty simple. marked with the name of the Alp and its altitude, terroir-driven at 1,295 meters. Some pink pigs, the chubby beneficiaries of whey from cheese making. You know, they feed the whey to the pigs because there's a lot of whey. Only 10% is cheese and the remaining 90% is whey. So they've got to find a home for it somehow. So the pigs were basking contentedly in the early morning sunshine. A few curious calves peeped around a wall. We climbed the steps to the chalet to meet our cheesemaker host for the morning, Jean-Louis Roche. Ruddy-faced, wreathed in smiles, clad in a full-length leather apron, because they're working close to an open fire, so they're glad to have that leather apron, and sporting a single earring. He was a great guy. He removed his arms from the vat of cheese and offered each of us in turn a dripping forearm. You know, they do this, instead of shaking him by the hand, they offer. In the middle of the room, which was not much bigger than an average-sized kitchen, a copper vat, it has to be copper, that's part of the deal, blackened with wood smoke on the outside and gleaming within, was suspended over a crackling wood fire, and that's also part of the deal. It's got to be an open fire, just lit on the ground. It contained last evening's milk, left to stand overnight in large, shallow pans, and relieved with some of its cream, together with the morning milk, fresh from the cows in the milking parlour below. To these had been added some starter culture reserved from yesterday's cheese making and a dose of rennet. While the milk was warming, things are always sort of happening and you can go off and do something else, and in this case we went and had breakfast. I had some wonderful breakfasts on this trip, on this research project. We were invited into the wood panelled kitchen next door for steaming cups of coffee, smoothed and enriched with gobs of cream. There is cream like you wouldn't believe. They live on cream. And they all look so well on it. From a small wooden tub. I don't know whether you've seen these lovely little tubs. Like a little tiny barrel, beautifully carved, with a lovely wooden carved spoon, which you can ladle stuff out of. Jean-Louis' son, Sébastien, joined us. He's apprenticed to a farmer in Solothurn, which is the German-speaking part of Switzerland. That way I can learn Swiss German, he explains, because he's basically a French speaker, and where we were at this moment, we were right on the border between the French and the German-speaking parts. And I get to see how other people farm, he said. And cheese making he's learning from his father at weekends and during the holidays. I asked if Sébastien will continue this great Alpine tradition when his father retires, because this is quite a crucial thing. I was very curious to see to what extent the younger generation are going to carry on doing this. But it's quite tough, you know. I mean, you go up there, it's very simple. You've got to have a partner or a wife or somebody who's into mucking at the cows, shoveling shit. You know, I mean, it's fairly cool and it can pour with rain and you can be down in the, you know, it's not a barrel of laughs. I mean, I think we all perhaps have a slightly romanticised view, but it's quite tough. So I was curious to know. And the answer, he claimed, yes, definitely. He responds vigorously. And his dad said, on doit absolument le maintenir. We really have to keep this going. And he added that they do get good support from at local level, from their local member of parliament, if you like, and also at federal level. And by now, back in the dairy, it was clear from the smoothly solidifying mass in the vat that the starter and the rennet had already set the milk off on its cheesy journey. Jean-Louis pressed the button to activate the cheese harps, they go whirling around, set into the mechanical arm straddling the vat. Once the granules were cut by the harps to the correct size, he exchanged them for paddles and swung the vat across to the fire, which he now stoked up to a fearsome heat. It's very physical and it's sort of primitive in a way when you watch it happening, but at regular intervals, Jean-Louis dipped a thermometer into the vat. That was about the most high-tech piece of equipment that he had to check the temperature. Occasionally, he would reach in and scoop out a handful of curds, squeezing the grains questioningly into a ball, and then opening up his fist to check for the right texture, consistency, and grip. You want the little grains. They look like, if you haven't seen this, they look like cottage cheese granules, really. And they tasted absolutely nothing. That was another thing. Whenever I went to see people making cheese, at this moment they would always say, would you like to taste a bit? And so we immediately tasted. Have you ever had curds Have you ever had that ghastly thing in Canada called poutine? Poutine! Yeah, they're kind of rubbery and they squeak on your teeth and they taste of absolutely nothing at all. And in a way, to me, that's rather extraordinary because this thing that's tasting of nothing at all, and you realise that 8 months, 10 months, 18 months down the line, there's going to be the most extraordinary flavours in there, but right at the beginning they tasted nothing. So once he had judged the curds to his liking, he motioned to Sébastien, and together they took hold of the 4 corners of a large cheesecloth, leant into the vat, and scooped up a load. They gathered up the 4 corners of the cloth into a balloon-like bag, hoisted it high, gave the bag a squeeze, and transferred it, steaming and dripping away, to a circular cheese mould set before the window, on the other side of the dairy. Finally, Jean-Louis leant heavily on the curds to make sure they were well ensconced, and patted a few stray grains firmly in place. The cheeses were dated, born as it happened on the 4th of July, that's the date that I went, numbered, and all of this, of course, is a big element of the traceability. 30th wheel this summer, and this is written on the side of the rind, and affixed with the identification plaque bearing Jean-Louis' number. Then he brought the 4 corners of the cheesecloth up over the top and tied them in a rough top knot. The cheeses would then be pressed overnight and salted for 24 hours. And then they would go down to the valley where they would be matured for, well, they have to be matured in Gruyere for, I think it's 5 months, isn't it? And can be up to 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Who's doing the
That, in this case, it's the cooperative down in Charmey who represent all of them, because he hasn't got the facilities in his little chalet to do, serious aging. So they stay up with him for a few days and then they go down and do central. All Gruyere, whether lowland Gruyere or Alpage, is aged at least 5 months, although it would be akin to infanticide to eat such a fine cheese so young, and it's true that, any younger would be a real shame. Before we left, Jean-Louis selected an 18-month-old, 50-centimetre diameter wheel. They're huge. It's quite physical, this stuff. They weigh 35 kilos, these things, and they've got to constantly turn them and heave them around. So it's, and he's got a good burly pair of arms. He lifted down a wheel from the wooden shelf and carved off a generous hunk for our inspection. The smooth, buttercup yellow flesh was almost devoid of holes. This is another thing. I think a lot of people think Gruyere has holes, but it doesn't, or shouldn't. And if it's in a competition, the sort of thing that you've been judging in Rosemary, if it's in Switzerland and the Gruyere has holes, they get marked down for that. They definitely, Emmental has lots of holes, but Gruyere should not. And the rind was a rich orangey brown. He wrapped the piece carefully in waxed paper emblazoned with the proud Gruyere d'Alpage label. Back home, we cut slivers of the cheese, sniffed, nibbled, and rolled it experimentally around our mouths. Faint suggestions of alpine flora, sweet mountain air, and fugitive aromas of wood smoke. That's another element that you get in these Alp cheeses, because the vat is open and there's a wood fire, and there's definitely a slightly smoky hint, preceded a powerful hit on the palate from the beautifully matured cheese, punctuated with tiny, crunchy protein crystals. That's one of the things I love about aged Gruyere, is the crunchy bits. So if you ever get the chance to see Alp cheese making, I really recommend it, because it's just, you can be hiking up in the mountains and you'll come across a chalet where they're making cheese and they love an audience. So you could always just kind of peer in over the door. So what have we got now? You've had the Heublumen and the red wine?
Right. So there's actually 4 different wines, 2 light reds and 2, one light red, one heavier red, and then a light wine and a heavier white. We've tried to match them, and then we'll just leave them if you want to experiment for your own matches, because there's obviously a taste. Now this is a Dôle du Valais, so it's from Valais. It's the classic everyday red in Valais.
Does everyone know where the Valais is? It's the Rhone Valley. It's the Rhone Valley, the bit that goes up from Lake Geneva.
So if you've ever gone to skiing in Zermatt or Saas-Fee or any main ski resorts, and you've started to go down in Valais. This is a blend of Pinot Noir and Gamay. Its proportions vary from winemaker to winemaker. This being a more everyday entry-level version of it's probably, they don't say, but it's probably 40% Gamay, 45% Gamay, and 55 to 60% Pinot Noir. It makes kind of a fragrant, light, fruity red that should go quite well with the cheese that is potentially a very strong cheese, but it's still quite young and has a liveliness. The two should enhance each other quite.
How many of you know Vacherin Mondor?
Yes.
Okay, that's the one everyone's familiar with. This is a different Vacherin. This is called Vacherin Fribourgeois. It's a semi-hard cheese. We both agreed, didn't we, Rachel? This is greatly underrated. In Switzerland, it often goes into fondue. It's usually one of the components in fondue, along with Gruyere. Well, I think the moitié is Gruyere and Vacherin Fribourgeois, yeah. And it somehow gets consigned to, great in a fondue. But actually, eaten on its own, I think it's absolutely delicious. It's got, it's a semi-hard, so in the raclette family, all of those.
So
it melts beautifully. That's why it goes into fondue.
Does it come from Vacherin? Was it similar at the beginning?
Vacherin, apparently, the word simply means a smaller cheese than the big guy, the Gruyere, made by the little cowhand. I think the name actually means like, vache, the little guy who looked after the cows. And so it's kind of a generic term.
The apprentice cheese.
Yeah.
There's always an apprentice cheese. They'll make Gruyere, and then in the little shop next to where they make the Gruyere, there'll be a little white 3-day-old thing, and the apprentice makes it. They're usually very wonky.
Yeah, lovely. That's his teeth.
So, how chauvinistic are Swiss people about their cheese? I mean, will they go and buy cheese from another canton, or do they
Yes, they will. Yes, very much so. And I think, along with these developments that I was telling you about amongst the cheesemakers, I think there's a big development amongst the public who are really valuing their own cheeses now in a way that they probably didn't before. I mean, they're very keen on French cheese, and they, France is right next door, and they buy a lot of it, and a lot of it is imported. But they are, I think, really increasingly proud of their own, and quite a good example of this, demonstration of this, is the fact that top restaurants in Switzerland now will often, it seems amazing to me that they didn't always do it, but they will offer an enormous selection of only Swiss cheeses now. They might have a few French ones, but they'll make a sort of thing of that. The whole thing about Swissness is very in at the moment. I think there's a new pride in their own. They've kind of realised, as you get a look at what other people are doing, you perhaps value your own stuff even more.
So that's 3 months old. It's actually thermised milk. It's not raw milk. Although it's not pasteurised.
What did you say?
Well,
Thermised?
and they use the term thermised pretty loosely in Switzerland. It usually means they've heated the milk up to around 60 and then cooled it down straight away. And the cheesemaker in this case, he makes Gruyere as well, and he does make raw milk Vacherin. But he says he comes in every morning and he tastes the milk and he makes a decision whether he uses the term even it out. So then he'll heat the milk up a little bit and then cool it down. So it's not pasteurization. I don't think it's affecting the milk too much, but they use it as a way of evening it out. And I have tasted both his cheeses with him, the raw milk and this one, the thermised, and he and I both agree we prefer the thermised one. The other is good as well, but it's not as delicate in flavour. This is about the only cheese in Switzerland that has any sort of acidity as well, and that's particular to him as well. He goes with that. It's a bit more yogurty, I suppose. And he told me a good story. I don't know, how old do you think he is? I can never judge cheesemakers. They always look about 40 years younger than they are. So maybe he's in his 50s. And he said that the the flora in the milk, since he's been making cheese, has completely changed. Whereas when he first started, there was so much going on that they were using less starter and there were all these other flavours coming out. He said now it's so flat, and he thinks, his theory is that's agriculture and spray and that sort of thing. He said there's just so much less in the air and less in the milk.
Are there certain breeds of cows that they use to make the milk?
They've not, unlike in France, where, for instance, Beaufort d'Alpage has to be made from the milk of the Davantaise cows. In Switzerland, they haven't built into their AOC things a particular breed. So they've been, and actually their herd book is a bit of a mess. They're all kind of interbred, and there are Holsteins, both black and red. There are those lovely brown Swiss cows, which are my favourites, with their wonderful kind of eye makeup and kind of cafe au lait colour. Yeah, there are a few others, but those are the principal ones.
And the Swiss browns are actually American, because the original Swiss brown cow they took to America and they rebred it and then sent it back. So when you see a Swiss brown in Switzerland, it's either unusually it'll be the original, or now it's more likely to be the version that got changed in the States and came back. Yeah, but they have these mixed sort of herds. They are, there's a lot of cheesemakers that pay more for milk coming from cows that have still got their horns on them. That's a new thing. They think that that's better for cow welfare and thus better for the milk. So you get a premium if you keep the horns on cows.
How old was that Vacherin?
About 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
Incredible depth.
Feels like more.
Yes,
doesn't it?
yeah. And fabulous texture. I think it does melt beautifully as well.
It is interesting. There are quite a few British cheeses now being started to be made in this sort of style.
Yeah, in the semi-hard sort of category.
Yeah, very much so.
Idea.
Sometimes
Yes.
this cheese that you've just tasted is very like Gorth Caerphilly, for instance. That has, sometimes very similar. If it's a bit younger, it has that same yogurty.
There's a cheese made by Liburn cheese called Stony Cross that is similar to that. It's like its voice hasn't broken yet. You know, it's sort of, you know, it's not quite got the guts, but you know.
The only sort of Swiss style cheeses I remember were in Ireland from
That's why I think
gentleman whose name I can't remember from down in Skull.
Allsop and Walker in East Sussex are making some now.
Yes.
In that same sort of huge.
Yes, I'm not sure they've quite got the
No, maybe not.
flavour quite yet.
No,
Yes.
no, absolutely. But it's interesting that there are more and more sort of coming along trying to do it. But none of them are getting here yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was a good example.
Cracking.
Right, so I'll be very brief about the wine. This is Petit Arvin. It's also a grape from the Valais. It's not native from Switzerland, but it's been in Switzerland, I think, since 16 or 1500 or older. Probably came with the Romans. Most grapes came either with the Romans or the monks at some point. It is pretty much only grown in Switzerland and a little bit in Austin, Italy. It is a very aromatic. Compared to the previous wine, it also has a lot much higher acidity. It also has a bit more sugar, but it will still be a far more acidic wine, which will go well with the acidity in the cheese. But it also has a bit of sweetness and extract, so it smells and tastes like it should be sweeter than it is. So it will also go quite well with the spritz afterwards. It's the spritz afterwards. Yes, so it will go well with both. But you have all three on the table. You should have all three on the table.
It sort of verges on a German Spätlese, closer to sweeter and more acidic. That's the sort of taste that the Victorians liked very much. And me.
What matters, it's the balance between the acidity and the sugar is what defines a wine. You can have both much higher and it's still the same.
So it says appellation of Wallace, but is that Valais?
Valais, yes. It's Valais. This is from, I mean, I could talk forever about them. This is from the Chanton family, which are at the very end of Valais. If you
They're in the
Vis-
German-speaking
Viège.
part of the valley. Most of it is French-speaking, but up at the top end.
And the father and grandfather went on a quest to find lost grapes that they remember that used to be done in all the villages. It took them years. They found 6. Petit Darwin isn't one of them. That was still known. And they revived these 6 different varieties of wine. Now some of them are better than others. They're mostly interesting. Sometimes it's more curious because you know why other varieties took over, because the acidity in those is a lot higher. But it's just a fascinating family, and these wines are made in a not quite completely natural, but a very natural way. It tends to wait to see if the natural yeasts are going to kick in and do fermentation naturally, which you can get away at the end of the valley because it's so pure. But you get very crystal clear, pure wines. And this is possibly a variety you've never had before.
That's very nice. So where do the holes in Emmental come from?
Where do they come from?
Yes.
From propionic acid.
Propionic acid.
It's the particular culture that they use
Right.
to make the cheese, and it provokes carbon dioxide bubbles in the finished cheese. And it's fascinating actually when you visit an Emmentaler dairy and see them maturing, because they're huge great wheels, as you know. It's like a great tractor wheel. And when they first go into the warm, rather humid cellar, they're fairly sort of straight-sided and the top is fairly flat. And after a few days, I don't remember exactly how many, but it's all in my book, this carbon dioxide thing starts to happen. And the top really kind of puffs up quite a bit, and the sides kind of go out, and those are the holes forming inside.
Those are the holes.
Yes. It's. I think Emmentaler is another one that's greatly underrated. I don't know about what your perception of Emmentaler is. I always had thought it was rather dull, slightly uninteresting flavour. And that's certainly true of the tons and tons of Emmental that's produced in France, which tastes really nothing. But a really decent Swiss Emmentaler. Do you keep an Emmentaler? You do. And how many months is it?
Minimum 10.
Yeah, that's the thing. Most of them are
3. They sell it at 3.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's the problem.
So obviously it has no.
This is most supermarket Emmentaler. I know that the likes of Waitrose and so on are actually now sort of packaging bad, maybe poorly, but at any rate, selling more aged and with a provenance stated. But how was the other ones? I mean, presumably you don't buy supermarket generally because it's not.
I'm not terribly clued up about the UK. I don't come yet so often, but where we are, the age of the cheese is actually written on the label, even if it's packaged. So it will say, 3 years, 8 months, or 4 months, or 12, or whatever.
It's a very recent development.
And that's in a supermarket, yeah. But that is helpful to know.
That doesn't. I don't think that happens in Switzerland. They judge it on salt. So on the salt flavour. So.
And they have these different categories.
Yeah. So they never really say. Yeah.
Once it goes over a certain age, they start to put it.
Well, no. I think what the problem is too. So they grade it according to this kind of almost the salty flavour. So, and then what's happening with Gruyere is cheesemakers are trying to get that salty flavour as quickly as possible, because then they think they get more money. It's a higher grade, and the supermarkets, let's say, sell it for more. Kind of similar to cheddar, how cheddar was here, that they made factory cheddar as sharp as they could to give this perception that it was aged, when quite often it's just the make. Because if you've had a piece of, I don't know, Quicks or Montgomery's that is 18 months old, you get no ridiculous kind of high notes in your mouth. It's more a rounded, full maturity of flavour. Whereas if you buy something from the supermarket that's vintage, it's just sharp in your mouth, isn't it? There's no other taste dimension. Yes, the sides of your mouth are kind of. So that's a little bit starting. I think has started to happen in Switzerland. Is and the Gruyere makers will talk about people who make Gruyere in the old style, which is slow maturation, and those who are making a new style. Supermarket.
What is fast maturation? You mean just selling it?
Fast maturation, I would say, is trying to get these false mature flavours as quickly as possible. So usually that's
Not
higher
through
acidity, not through aging, but
more by the choices that they make.
yes, yeah. But that's kind of like an empty flavour, I would say.
Hollow.
Yeah.
Propionic.
Propionic.
Where else do we find it?
What other cheeses?
I don't know. Interestingly enough, the Emmentaler cheesemaker told me that that bacteria is in the milk naturally or in the environment naturally, but they introduce it to regulate it, basically.
Yes.
Otherwise, it just goes a bit nuts. So they introduce propionic to control, I suppose. Did you like the sprints that you just had?
Yes.
Isn't that lovely? The most underrated cheese in Switzerland.
How many of you have heard of Spritz? SBRANZ, when you've heard of it? I think it's
So that was 30 months old.
30.
30.
Wow.
2.5 years.
It manages to still get it creamy.
Oh, it's totally creamy. Yeah.
I can't believe it's that old. Yeah, it's amazing.
And I think lovely, just a chunk with a glass of wine and nothing else, no bread, nothing. So SBRANZ.
Rachel, where do you sell your cheeses?
Well, we sell directly from Druid Street, which is between Bermondsey and London Bridge, under the railway line. We sell to Selfridges, La Fromagerie, Whole Foods, Mortimer & Bennett, Turnham Green.
Are you only open in your carve on Saturdays?
Yes, on Saturdays, and on Thursdays we do wholesale orders, so if you come and knock on the door, we'll sell you cheese, but we don't set up a table, we'll just go and get what you want.
Okay.
That last cheese and the Petit Argin were a marriage made in heaven.
That's nice. Nice to know. Yeah.
The problem with sprints for us as a retailer is, for some reason, no one knows why, it seems to sort of oxidize, for want of a better word, as soon as it's out, and the flavour changes on the cut surface. So whenever we're giving someone a taste, we have to make sure it's a freshly cut piece, otherwise they don't get the full idea of the flavour. And in Switzerland, what they do is they pre-cut it into cubes, put it into a tray, and gas flush it, which I think is terrible. But in some ways, it's a way of getting people to eat it, and like they would eat Parmigiano Reggiano, let's say, with a glass of wine. But I sort of say to people, buy a slab, keep it wrapped up, just put it out as just one cheese that you have after dinner with a knife. Let people cut off pieces, and that keeps it quite fresh. But it has this problem. I don't know how to change that, because we all get excited about retailing it, and then no one buys it. But it's a very good cheese.
How did you fall in love with Swiss cheese, Rachel? Did you have a sort of introduction to it?
Well, there was a man involved. They're always
with leather shorts.
Actually, that's
Couldn't resist.
Don't go any further.
and it wasn't Swiss.
It is ultimately less complicated to fall in love with the cheese.
Yeah, you know where you're on.
I wanted to be a cheesemaker. So I worked at Neal's yard with this whole thing of I wanted to make cheese. And then Randolph said to me one day, Rachel, making cheese is not like skipping through a field of daisies. So I thought, maybe not, no. And so I was going to make a Gruyere style in New Zealand, because we were farming, my parents were farming, and we had very good grass. We weren't feeding silage, so it seemed a natural thing to do. I went and did a business plan and a study, and in New Zealand it's ruled by one dairy company, which is a cooperative, and they made it as difficult as possible to do anything with milk. But I was still keen, and I realised, okay, I need 300,000 New Zealand dollars to get started. So I'll go back to England to save some money. And I came back, and my then boyfriend at the time was a banker and moved to Switzerland. And he said, you need to come over here. So I arrived in Switzerland with no job and not much money, and I was bored. And so I started exporting cheese probably within 6 weeks, I think. First lot went to New Zealand, and then within 2 months it came to the UK. So that's a Gruyere. It's 18 months old.
Oh, the smell.
So it's a summer cheese. Summer 2011. The dairy is at about 900 metres, so it's actually quite high. They have 15 farmers are supplying milk to the dairy, and they deliver milk in the morning and in the evening. The dairy is owned by the village cooperative, and it's rented by the cheesemaker. I would easily say with confidence, hand on heart, this is the best Gruyere made in Switzerland. Wow. Always consistently good flavour. Has occasional blip around January, but
Who is it who makes it? Is this the one in Madison?
in the
Okay.
So what happened if this is 18 months? If you went back to the same person and said, give it to me at 24 months, is it better, worse? You know, how is it? Do you think it's really best?
And the cheesemaker says, and I agree with him, that by 12 months you've got all the sort of flavour development that you're going to get in terms of the milk and the acidity turning out this, and the grasses giving you a certain flavour profile. And then after about 12 months, then you're in that realm of it's getting older, you're getting crystallization, the flavours are intensifying, but there's no new things coming in. And you also, I think as the rind ages, you get a slight mustiness coming through just from the rind, and that goes into the cheese. When I've been buying from this cheesemaker since I started for 7 years, he basically makes cheese, and then I think he personally holds his own cheese for at least 2 or 3 months, and then it goes to the maturing house. Gruyere makers sell all their cheese to the maturing house. The contracts are set up years in advance. They've got a price they get. They're allowed to sell 5% of their own production, which they will sell in their own shop that's attached, its own village. They're not allowed to sell any of that 5% to a wholesale customer, so to someone like me. It has to be direct retail. So they're really protecting their market. Yeah. And his maturing house, which we work with quite strongly, they would only mature to say 8 months, and at a stretch 12 months. So we had great problems having anyone mature to 18 months. No one thought there was any value in it. And in fact they said, oh, but you'll get mite and there'll be weight loss, so less yield. But what I've noticed in the last 7 years is I had lunch with the managing director of this maturing house, and he said, Rachel, we're maturing to 12 months now. We've got 3 cheesemakers, and whatever you want, we'll do it, but you have to pay for it. Sorry.
When you say crystallization, what do you mean? Because I thought there was, I would not disparaging this cheese at all. There's a sort of grit in it.
Grit, exactly. Grit
of something.
Yes. It's not salt. It's a reaction of the protein to the milk in the maturing process. You'd get the same in a good cheddar that has matured to the same age. Yeah. And to a lot of people, that's a positive thing. They like the texture, which is very interesting. That shows that texture is so important to people.
Having a cheese judged in Switzerland, you would lose a little bit of points for you would lose a bit of points for the look of the rind. It's kind of very fascinating.
Oh yes,
the Swiss judge.
Rind
is not the Gruyere has to be smooth. There must be almost no cracks and no.
The crystallisation happens the later cheeses.
Yeah.
It's a longer.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an indication of certain maturity.
I don't know.
Younger Gruyères
It's
don't have
the
that.
proteins in the milk do some sort of reaction. I don't know the science.
Yeah,
I'm
protein
sorry.
crystals. Yeah, I thought they were soft.
I think sometimes 18 months.
Yes.
But you said, what, did they mature it for you for 18 months, or have you taken it and then matured it?
No, they mature it for 12. Then we send it to someone else.
Oh, I see.
Who wants to make money, and they mature it for the rest of the time.
Right. I was just going to say it worked. Yeah.
But that was so. That's just changing now that the maturing house that buys it from the cheesemaker are going to mature it on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the name of the Gruyere?
Of the cheesemakers of this particular Gruyere is Duna. I can't say it. It's spelled Duna. Like Duno. Yeah.
But you'll never actually be able to buy a Gruyere that's from Monsieur Duno because it's not
just
identified.
Well, no.
I mean, we know that, you know that,
Yeah.
but that's something that interested me a lot actually.
No,
when I was writing the book, I was asking these people, but how can I get your Gruyere?
Yeah.
But you say
and they
it's
said,
the
well,
best
look,
one. But
if you know what my little number is, my
Yes,
identification number, and you buy a whole thing weighing 35 kilos, you know. Otherwise,
they would send them to the maturing house, and of course, the maturing house they mature per cheesemaker because that's part of control. But once they sell it, normally it's going out to distributors, supermarkets.
Yeah.
They would someone will call up, say from Waitrose, and say, I want some cheese, and their profile is 12-month-old cheese. So they'll get everything that's 12-month together. So because I'm from here and learned my cheese here with Neal's Yard Dairy, I went to Switzerland and said, I want a cheese, but I just want it from one person. And they were like, why? Why?
They can't tell that there's a difference between.
Well, they know, they definitely can.
Know.
They definitely can, but because it was a commodity, the culture was not. People just ate it. They didn't talk about it.
Because I really wanted my cousin's cheese, because my cousin was a cheesemaker and a dairy man. Because in the plains, you get the milk and you make the cheese and you sell the milk on it. And it was, you can't, because if he could sell it direct, he sold it to the Army's officer corps and to directly in his little shop. But the rest of it just goes into a mass and it becomes anonymous. And I can't buy a cheese, and I couldn't buy a half a wheel and bring it back. He's only allowed to sell so much to private individuals. It's very controlled.
It is changing though, it is changing.
It is changing.
But it is totally different from, I always say in England cheesemaking is sort of a lot of hippies and it's romantic. And, and everyone wants to talk about it. Whereas in Switzerland, it's a job, it's a profession, they've got a guild, they're serious, and it's men.
This is the wine made in more international style. It's from Geneva, from Domaine des Abigords. It's called Douce Noir, sweet and dark. It is probably one of the best-selling top wines in Geneva. You'll find it in all the top restaurants. It's a wine. It is an unusual blend nonetheless. The two main grapes in it are Gamay and Garanois. So there are two.
Are they Swiss?
Did you recognize
bred?
them?
Yeah.
They're Swiss
Gamay,
bred, I
RET, and Garanois. And I think they're
They're Swiss creations from Champagne. They came up in the 60s, I think. They were trying to create variants of Gamay that would, if possible, not be susceptible to illnesses, so they wouldn't need to be cloned, but also would have slightly different properties. I think they're best in a blend. But further to that, there's then some international varieties. There's Cabernet Sauvignon, some Merlot. So it's a more international style of wine, but it still can't outstage the Gruyere.
Mountain cheese, and they are
in
the bottom southeast corner of Switzerland, German speaking. Very, very high up. In the
So is it the Engadine?
No.
Southeast.
Hinterrhein.
Right. Yes.
It's a group of farmers. There's 17 of them. in this small village. They've all got, you know, the same thing, 15, 20 cows each. They own a dairy where they make cheese, and they've employed the same cheesemaker for 8 years. And that's one of the recipes for success, is consistency with a cheesemaker. And they make what this is called a berg käse, so it's usually about 6 kilos. It's a round form, washed rind like the Gruyere. And this is a year old. They are quite inspired. It's organic. They've got mountain milk, so the cows are up very, very high during the summer, and then in the winter they're in the sheds, but they're eating hay that was made from the Alp. Alp is very protected, so they can only make hay every 2 years because they have to let the grasses and the flowers regenerate. And the farmers are inspired. They spent last year building maturing caves so that they can age their cheese between 8 and 12 months. So normally the cheesemakers are trying to get rid of cheese at 3 months just to make money. You know, these guys saw value in having an aged cheese. And yeah, animal rennet. So it's a pretty simple recipe. A lot of people do the same kind of thing, but it's aged and it's good grass. Also, a big thing why they innovated was when the EU all came together, the Swiss cheesemakers were freaked that they were going to lose business because the EU would be shut out basically. So they thought they should innovate to make something interesting so they had more to put in the marketplace and to achieve more. But my personal thing is that Gruyere, Emmentaler, Sprints are good. They're great cheeses. And in fact, if you continue to make those very, very well, like Stilton or Cheddar in the UK, you should be able to make more and make more money and make it of an excellence. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm not selling enough of this, I'll just make another variety and then I'll capture more of the market. It's just not necessary. And so there's this shift in Switzerland at the moment to reassess their territorial cheeses, I suppose, is the way of
I think it depends where you are. It's okay. You've got to market it in the borough market, which will come and buy. Where I am in Cheshire, and I've got a house in Cheshire, right up here. The only words you get for Switzerland are Gruyere and Emmentaler. And that's it. Nobody bothers about what the quality is or anything. And I wonder how far there's going to be a market for Swiss cheese, given the economic situation, where people are having to spend more and more and more on food, and more on energy. And I've noticed that in my Lidl's, the number of people who are there has increased, I said, by about 100-fold, as opposed to leaving Sainsbury's or Waitrose. And I would say that elsewhere in the smaller regions, you've only got Gruyere, Emmentaler, and nobody bothers about who makes it or what it is, and they might use it like Parmesan for grating.
It's funny, I used to be at Borough Market, I've since left, but I would have Swiss people walk past our stand, and of course our standard thing was, hi, do you want to try some cheese? They would walk past and go, no, I know it. and we would, because we're sad individuals, we'd say, no, come, try. And so they'd come and try and they'd say, oh, it's really good. The Swiss must export all the best cheese.
And this is good.
Yes, And then they would buy some to take back to Switzerland. But I think the perception of our customers is entirely from tasting. They might not know much about it. They know you can get Emmentaler pre-sliced in the supermarket and it's a bit waxy and whatever. And they know Gruyere is quite good. They're usually associated with France though.
Really?
And say, isn't it like Conte? Or, isn't it the same? But as soon as someone tastes something which is good, whether they're an experienced food eater of that quality, cheese eater, anyone has a capability of saying that's good quality, and so they do. But until you get some cheese in someone's mouth, it's probably, yeah, it's not as good as France and not as good as cheddar. So.
Yeah. Is there a reason why you didn't bring an Emmentaler? Is there not a good Emmentaler?
Oh no, there is no. You said that. We tried to sort of, we tried, yeah, no.
We'd still be here at midnight.
We tried to keep it short, but I buy the Emmentaler from a young guy who is the secretary of the Emmentaler Association, and he's totally passionate about Emmentaler, and he like
Which takes a lot of doing nowadays.
we want to change the world.
Which town is it?
Sorry?
Which part of Emmentaler?
Oh, it's just out. He's just outside of Bern, actually.
Yeah. Which town?
Can't think of the
I
name
used
of
to
his
live
town.
right
He's
at the
got
beginning,
1
yeah.
and 2 different villages now.
So I used to live about 20 kilometres from the one in Europe.
So yes, the Emmentaler is great, but the
it
main
has
thing
to have a certain
is
age.
we sell 10-month cheese as the youngest. It has a great, you know, that waxy texture. I don't know where that came from. They thought that it's not waxy at all. It can be quite soft and pliable, sweet, nutty. And then we sell also a 16-month as well, which can be quite dry and intense. But Emmentaler is a very, very good cheese, but it has a perception of being non-standard. And also, the Swiss cheese is so expensive because the Swiss brand is so strong. So all these other Emmentalers from the Jarlsbergs and the French, everyone has a go at Emmentaler, doesn't they? Because they think you put holes in it, it's Emmentaler.
Just like that. Oh my God. We are going to have to draw the evening to a close. I sort of want to finish on positive notes. And having done a lot of work with the Guild of Fine Food this year, listening to Bob Duran, who will, by the way, be doing a workshop next year with us. He's very optimistic despite the economic climate, and he puts it all down to 2 things: taste and trust. And I'm sure that yeah, exactly. You feel an almost automatic trust in traders such as Rachel. When you've talked to them, you understand that you really can trust them. And then when you've tasted the cheeses, you can, or whatever the products, the wines in your case, you're completely convinced. And taste and trust, there will always be a place for, in fact, a growing place for, in that sort of economic morass that we're all trying to paddle in. It's something of quality is going to survive, and it's going to be increasingly appreciated, and the individual and the artisan and so on. But I mustn't speak too long either, because we need to clear up and clear out of this space by 9. But I really would like to thank these ladies for most brilliant kind of opening up of a secret world almost. I mean, who knew? You know, I didn't know a tenth of this, and I haven't experienced the tenth of this. And there's a whole world several worlds out there to dip into. So please do look up. The details are on the website, and there will be John's film right there, and Richard's photos, and all the details. Do look up and visit Rachel. Do buy Sue's book to learn more. And do look up Nick Dobson Wines, and the details are there. And dip into these things, even if you can't do it on a daily basis, and few of us can. But dip into them for a fascinating learning experience and a great taste experience. And yeah, sharing artisan joys. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.